Hello and welcome to the first session of the day from the beautiful city of Trieste. I'm delighted to be here in person at this ESOF conference, which has got off to a brilliant start. This session is dear to my heart, but though it's somewhat a bittersweet occasion, sweet because I love the European Research Council, and I love the way it's promoting frontier research in Europe. In this session, we're going to reflect on the past and the future. It's slightly bitter because the ERC, like all European institutions, is not in the best period. And for me personally, as a great lover of European science, indeed yesterday I was proud to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award for my contributions, meager though they are, to European science through Euroscience. The fact that Brexit negotiations are in such difficulty, we don't know whether the UK is going to associate with Horizon Europe and therefore the ERC. It's a terribly difficult position. It's a difficult position for the ERC itself with all the budgetary uncertainties in Brussels. But we have a stellar ERC cast here to discuss it, of past, present, and future participants. They're going to speak in the following order, and I think I'll introduce each one very briefly as he or she speaks. So we begin with Jean-Pierre Bourguignon, who was the ERC president and is now again pro tem. Jean-Pierre, please start us off talking about the frontiers of research and how ERC is promoting the best science in Europe and the world.
ERC, and thanks to you for having accepted to moderate it. So the whole idea of the ERC actually was the result of a long battle by the scientific community to really get a tool that was missing in the European battery of tools. And for the ERC from the very first day, and all the people who conceived it, there were scientists, there were also people on the side of the Commission or people from the political side. What was absolutely fundamental were two elements. The first one was the absolute freedom for research, because we know how important it is for researchers to be free to choose their topics, to choose the ways they want to develop their research, and to also to choose the people with whom they work. So this was one of the fundamental principles which has been kept from day one. And of course, I'm sure it will be kept for quite a long time. The other part which we knew was absolutely fundamental for ERC to succeed was to attract as evaluators for the program, because the whole idea was that researchers would, at their own initiative, submit their projects. And the project had to be ambitious, and because that was the idea, to create a space in which researchers would really try their most daring ideas. But then we knew that to do that in the right way, we needed to really convince some of the absolute best researchers to participate to the evaluation. And I think this is something which also has to be really monitored very, very closely. And I think the ERC managed indeed to attract as evaluators for the people applying to the program some of the very best scientists. And they are really fantastically committed, and we could check that since during the pandemic and in particular the lockdown, most of the meetings became virtual meetings. And of course, it's much more difficult to exchange with colleagues over a screen than just sitting in the same room and really having also the breaks to have some follow-up. And the dedication of both the staff and the evaluators during this period has been absolutely marvelous. The other point which was also implemented from day one, and I will be more or less finishing with this, is the fact that it appeared important, since we are requesting for people to propose ambitious projects, to give them a long enough time to develop their activities. And we thought that the people who created the ERC, but this has been kept, thought that really 5 years was the right period for developing this research. And another feature is, of course, the fact that 2/3 of the means of ERC are dedicated to young people, and this is very, very critical. Just to really conclude, for me, what is very important is always to remember that the research develops as an ecosystem which depends on many components. You need to have the right level of positions in order to develop research in the right way. You need to have also the good support in terms of facilities for a number of scientists. The equipment to which they have access is extremely important and makes a difference. But also they need to have very dedicated people to support. They could be technicians, they could be managers, and for this, of course, very importantly, the bureaucracy has to be as light as possible. I think I will stop here for these introductory remarks, thanking you again for giving me the opportunity to speak about the concept of ERC.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre. Thanks very much, Jean-Pierre. So our second speaker is Helga Novotny from Austria. She is perhaps the leading European science policy person at the moment, a former ERC president. And Helga, the floor is yours to take on what Jean-Pierre said in his excellent introduction.
Thank you very much, Clive, and welcome everyone to this session. And if Jean-Pierre went back to the past, a past that I remember very well. I was a founding member, and I went through these initial years where we had to negotiate on a day-to-day basis to implement the principles that Jean-Pierre mentioned. And for the success of the ERC, which it undoubtedly has become, I can only underline what Jean-Pierre said. It is important that it is PI-centered, it's the researchers, the scientists, who are the ones who bring their best ideas up, and we need the panelists, the best ones to evaluate. But as Jean-Pierre has talked about the past, I want to speak about the present and about the future. And let me be very honest, perhaps brutally honest. When I listen and read what is going on these days under the pressure of the COVID pandemic, we often, I wonder, and I ask this provocative question, do we still need excellence? Because I see a shift towards what people, in my view, wrongly call applied science. I see a shift towards what I call solutionalism, solutions just to be produced by pressing a button. And this is not the way how we will get the solutions that we need. And we also see a kind of flooding towards, the latest COVID-related research. Within the first 3 months of the pandemic, 40,000 scientific papers were published. So you can imagine much of it was rushed through. There was a lot of interesting data that had to be shared. The genome sequencing went very fast, but you really wonder what is happening there. And therefore, I want to emphasize, we have to become clear, do we still need excellence? Do we want excellence? And without answering this question, I think we are not there where we should be. And we as researchers, as scientists in Europe, and all of Europe and all researchers have benefited by having the possibility to apply to the ERC. I remember very well young researchers at the beginning who did not succeed in their national funding came to the ERC and they were funded because the evaluation system was there to recognize what they brought to the table. And let me finish by going back to this very unfortunate dichotomy that is still in so many people's minds, in the media, in politicians' speeches. There is basic research and there is applied research. And the underlying image that is conjured, well, the basic researchers, they just want to have fun, they want to play with their own ideas, and then there is the serious part, which is applied research. This is nonsense. And many people have said it before, and we know it, it's nonsense. We see on a day-to-day basis within the ERC how this borderline is being crossed. It makes no sense. And many people have repeated there is no basic research, no applied research, there's good science and bad science. Well, the problem is who decides on what is good science. And this is what the ERC is there for. And in my view, it would be better to start thinking about exploration and exploitation. Exploration means you're moving into the unknown. The space is vast. And now with digitalization, where we have reached a new way of using also the digital tools in science, algorithms that predict, that speed up processes, etc. We have new possibilities for exploring this immense space of possible knowledge that is still out there. And this is for me what the ERC stands for. And then there is exploitation. And let me just remind you of the etymological root of the word exploit. It's not about greed and about profit. It's about explicare in Latin, which means to unfold, to unroll, and then to take action. And therefore, I would plead to forget this division between basic and applied, and to really see and be very clear, we need both, we need exploration, and then we need to take action on the kind of knowledge that has been brought forth by exploration. I will finish here.
Helga, thank you for those provocative remarks with which I personally agree. We'll see whether the others do shortly. So we now move to a current ERC Vice President in the form of Professor Fabio Zverner. He is here in Italy, but unfortunately could not come to Trieste. Fabio, please.
Thank you. Well, I would like to comment on a point that was raised very well by the two previous speakers. I think we should resist nowadays the temptation of imposing top-down priorities to frontier science. We have ample evidence that frontier science is the prerequisite for major innovations, and it plays a crucial role in addressing known and previously unknown societal challenges. But these connections are very variable in time and structure. For example, when Röntgen discovered the X-rays, a few months later, the first radiography of a soldier with a bullet in his hand was performed. On the other hand, we had to wait more than a century before Einstein's theories of general relativity was applied to the GPS positioning system. And just to mention other examples from my own field of research, particle physics. Certainly there was a large investment in particle physics at CERN, for example, for the discovery of the Higgs boson. But this kind of investment generated several unpredictable spin-offs. For example, to facilitate communication among scientists, the World Wide Web was created on the basis of the previous internet. And this was put at the disposal of the society for free in an open way. Similarly, technologies that have been developed to achieve scientific results are also nowadays used in applications. I can think of the cancer therapy with the beams of protons that is done now in many facilities around Europe. So this makes me worry for the attitude that is being taken nowadays towards the budget for science in Europe, the budget of Horizon Europe, and within Horizon Europe, the budget of excellent science, and within excellent science, the ERC budget. For the first time, we run the risk of interrupting a development of a very successful story that was described by the two previous speakers. For the first time, we run the risk, if the compromise that was reached at the July summit of the heads of governments is confirmed, of not continuing in the increase and the development of an investment in frontier science. I hope that this will be corrected. There is still time, but not a lot of time to correct it. I think I can stop here for the moment.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Fabio. More points to take up later. Our last two speakers are ERC grantees, and they're going to talk from their perspective of people who are getting grants from the ERC for excellent frontier research. First, we go to Croatia for Iva Tolic. Iva.
Thank you, Claude.
Just a second. You are waiting the end of business. 3, 2, 1, go.
Thank you, Clive. So I will share with you my experience with ERC. So I work in cell biology. In particular, I work on cell division. And I have been working in different countries for more than 15 years. I did part of my PhD in the US. Then I did 2 postdocs, one in Denmark, one in Italy. And then I was leading a research group at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, which was fantastic. But after all this, I wanted to go back to my home country, Croatia, just for personal reasons, because I wanted to live there. But of course, scientifically, it wasn't so easy, or of course I knew that. I returned to Zagreb, and after this I applied for an ERC, and luckily I got the ERC grant. And this was a complete life changer for me, because in Croatia, or also some other EU 13 countries, scientific research is not so well funded, and in some fields you really need a lot of funds. So ERC completely changed my lab. Because of this, because I got the ERC grant, I could build a much bigger group, like a normal size group that can do serious research. I could buy equipment that I needed. I hired several young scientists. So my group was larger, and we had the freedom and enough time, these 5 years, to really do what I wanted to do, what was my dream project. So it was so beautiful to have the freedom to work on the idea that I really wanted to work on, and to have enough time and resources to do this. So this was a great start. Now I have to say, for the situations in countries that are, where the research is not so well funded, it's not so easy to continue after an ERC grant. So it would be important if the governments or institutions would somehow recognize this and help to continue and to sustain the good projects and somehow to invest in the continuation of these projects, to have some permanent positions, not only for the PI, but also for some staff scientists, lab managers, and other people who are very important to run a successful lab, and also some more core funding to be able to continue the research. So this was my experience with my ERC grant. I also have to say that luckily I was able to get a second ERC grant, and this was also a result of the first ERC grant, because the first one allowed me also to explore some completely new and risky areas, which then led to some preliminary results, which led to the second ERC grant. So this is a beautiful way how ERC works, that allows you to explore bold, new ideas that are risky, but that in the end can pay off. And I also want to emphasize, as the other speakers did just before me, that the basic research or exploration, as Helga said, is really important because we need to understand the basic rules of life, in the case of biological research, to be able to go on from there and to apply this to medical problems, to diagnosis, prevention, and of course, for finding new and better cures. An example from my field is that the research in cell division is really crucial for diseases such as cancer and problems of fertility and congenital diseases, because these diseases are related to the errors in cell division. So we really need to understand from the basic point of view how cell division works. And an example from the past is that one of the major chemotherapy, most of the major chemotherapy agents work in a way that they somehow change the cell division. And they work on the microtubules, which are the basic blocks of the mitotic spindle. So to develop these agents, we first needed to know how the cell divides. What are the basic principles, the biological rules of cell division, how the cell divides, what are the main structures there that do the job, what are the main proteins, and then only can we develop the agents that can work on to change these processes in the way that would help some to cure diseases or in different other ways to help. So exploration, basic research to understand how life works is really important to solve different medical problems. And I will stop here.
Thank you very much. That was a powerful and clear description of the reason we need basic exploratory research in biology.
Dr. Davis, can you hear me?
Cell biology in particular.
Okay.
So,
before
lastly,
the speech,
we're going to go to Trinity College Dublin to Anna Davies,
at the end of the business
another
card,
ERC grantee who's going to give
speech,
her
right?
perspective. Anna,
Thanks a lot.
please.
Bye. Three, two, one, go.
Thank you, Clive. It's great to be here this morning and to contribute to this important discussion. From my perspective as a social scientist, the ERC grant scheme has really been pivotal in progressing foundational, explorational science, as we've heard this morning, in my field in particular, which focuses on sustainability science and the decisions that we make about that. I had personally the ability to do with an ERC grant something which would have been impossible within my national funding framework. Really the significance, not just in the scale of funding, but in the duration of funding, has really made it possible for the kind of exploratory foundational science in a field which hadn't been examined before. So my project had looked at the role of socio-technical innovation around sustainable food systems, with a specific focus on the role of ICT in helping to stretch and shape the way that we share food, not just with our friends and family, but also more broadly within that. Really, in this sense, the ERC was like the holy grail for my research career, and I very much support what Ivo also said about this space for being life-changing and career-changing for individual scientists. But also, because of the scope of the ERC program, it also means that we are able to bring on a whole suite of team research-based projects. So I have worked with some amazing early career scientists throughout the project, from lots of different disciplines, from life cycle analysis to anthropology, from political science to sociology. And really, the ERC funding framework provides a way for building infrastructures of science. And I'd like to say that not only has this benefited me personally as a scientist and the research team, but also through the nature of public engagement with science. Through my project, we've been able to build a community of citizen scientists, of practitioner scholars, as well as basic scientists, if you like, and we were talking about that earlier. In addition, it's not that these projects work in isolation. Only yesterday I was on a panel with 2 other ERC holders working on similar issues, and there's a real opportunity for synergy at this notion of basic science, and that's been a real inspiration to me as well, working with projects looking at renaturing our cities, other projects examining urban sharing in different sectors. So the work that I've been doing looking at ICT-mediated urban food sharing has really been able to bounce off and spin off other ERC-funded research. And I think just for now, we would love to open up the floor for more discussions about some of the really nitty-gritty issues that we're addressing here around funding of science. But from my perspective, it's really just a great honor to be able to conduct science as a public good. All of the outputs from ERC research are openly available. For my project, all available from the website, for example. And I think that this is part of our duty as scientists to communicate our findings in ways which are accessible to multiple different audiences. And this open data and accessible scientific agenda and science as a public good is only gaining strength in certain circles, and we really need to, I think, communicate this better with a wider public. I'm not going to continue this monologue now. I'd much prefer to get into a conversation and debate perhaps with some of the other panelists about the future of frontier science. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Anna. I would urge everyone following at home or at work online to ask questions via the question facility on the ESOF app. I've got lots of questions, but one question has come through, which I will ask it because it takes us to the heart, I think, of the sort of political questions around the future of ERC and Horizon Europe. And this person, I don't have the name, says, as speakers have described, it might be difficult to continue at the same level of funding after the end of the current ERC funding period. What can be done at the EU and country institution level? I think we need to make it clear, and probably Jean-Pierre can answer this. It's not as if the ERC is being cut significantly, even if you get the worst budget outcome that you hope for. It's just that your wonderful work, which you had hoped to expand and grow, you will not be able to grow. Can you make this clear, please, Jean-Pierre and others, for our listeners, whether you might be entering a period of cuts or standstill or still some growth? And then we can take it on from there.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be specific about that, because that's, of course, a very important point. Actually, one thing we have been witnessing with ERC is the present success rate, as we call it, that is the ratio between people we can fund and people that apply, is presently around 12%. That's that is for 100 people applying, 12 get funded. Of course, we know that not all the 100 who applied actually are people we would like to fund, but definitely we would like to fund many more. And presently, more or less every year, among the ERC applicants, there are about 400 of them who really get the highest grades in the sense and the highest evaluation, and for which the panel members would very, very much like them to be funded. So 400 is about 40% of the 1,000, which is presently the number of grants that ERC is able to give with the budget it has. Therefore, we, in a sense, know that with no further ado, that is because people don't have to give more indication on the application and the evaluators don't have to do more work on the evaluation, we could increase the number of ERC grants basically without lowering the level of selection, that is, without lowering the quality. And we know we can do that already in the present setting. So in a sense, with the perspective, which is the one we have ahead of us at the moment, of being frozen for 7 years, we know we are going to miss a very significant number of excellent projects, and for which actually all the work has been done. So this is one of the reasons why we argue that an increase in the budget of ERC is not just is a very sure bet, in the sense that we know on the past experience that actually this is really something, this bet would definitely produce fantastic fruits. And of course, some of the people who are not funded a year get funded the next year. But still, I mean, we know that there is a huge margin of improvement in terms of the efficiency of the system if the ERC was given more funds.
Right. So it is, just to be absolutely clear, it's standstill rather than an actual cut if the worst happens.
Well, you never know. In a sense, that's the present situation as it came out of the compromise in July.
Yes.
But of course, many people are unhappy about the cuts which have been done overall to what was the planned funding for Horizon Europe. And of course, it will be a very bitter fight if we are staying with the present proposal for the budget for Horizon Europe between the various components. And of course, you never know who is going to really win. For the moment, as you said, we are just in a frozen perspective. So I hope we are not staying in this perspective, which my battle is to get a better budget for the overall Horizon Europe, not just for the ERC. But we know that in the end, if things don't change, we are still hoping they will change, there will be a very tough battle.
Thank you. Before I take that further, I should just say I've been told that that question came from Anne Combon-Thompson, who was the champion of ESOF 2018 in Toulouse. So thank you, Anne. We do also have people here in the hall, and I'm going to take a question in the hall. But first of all, before I do that, I'm just going to ask Helga to follow up on what Jean-Pierre said about what a standstill budget would mean.
Well, it means that at the present moment, where so much of our future in Europe, in each country, but also worldwide, is very, very uncertain, we are frozen. And this means instead of looking ahead, instead of looking for the opportunities that are there for the next 7 years to come, we sort of retreat and will continue with what we have at a very high level. But there is no room for the sort of dynamics that should come out of a crisis. A crisis means a lot of suffering for many people. but at the same time, it can unleash a dynamic to look forward and to seize the new opportunities. And where are they, if not in science and research?
Thank you. Now, there's a gentleman here who has a question. If you perhaps go to the microphone there, we can hear what you have to say. And please say who you are. Can we have sound, please, on the microphone there? Why don't, if you shout your question, I will repeat it. Actually, I think, are these microphones working? In which case you can try this one. Sorry about this. It's the problem with a, no. It's the problem with a virtual event, isn't it? Do you want to come here and ask your question? That is working.
Okay, so should I repeat?
Yes. Sorry, everyone.
Okay, I'm Martin Andler. I'm the president for Initiative for Science in Europe, and we played a very important role, I think, in the creation of ERC, and we're very much in favor of ERC, and we're fighting very hard to try and increase the budget for ERC, as Jean-Pierre and Helga pointed out. It's a very crucial issue. I have another question, however. We see that in the grants given by ERC, there's a very strong imbalance between countries which get a lot of grants and countries which do not get a lot of grants. So I don't think that this is necessarily or really an issue for ERC to solve, but this is an issue for European science. How do we try to correct those imbalances between sort of forward-looking countries which have excellent science and lots of ERC grants and countries which receive very few grants? So what do the leaders of ERC have to say about what the European Union could do to improve the situation?
Thank you, Martin. That was a very good question, and I think I will turn perhaps to Fabio to answer Martin's point.
Yes, the ERC is aware of the fact that there are countries that are performing worse than others in various parts of Europe. Also, my own country is not performing excellently in the ERC in terms of success rate. We are very closely monitoring that. We have a dedicated working group called Widening European Participation, which is trying to take initiatives to make the ERC scheme better known in those countries, to facilitate, for example, visits of young scientists from those countries to ERC teams operating in other countries. Of course, being devoted to excellence, the ERC cannot go apart from its only selection criterion, scientific quality, aiming from excellence. Therefore, it's the duty, in a sense, of the European Union to improve the conditions for science in those countries, helping with research infrastructures and to create the suitable environment for researchers to flourish. I see the ERC as also quantitatively as the cherry on the cake of the national research system. So it's out of doubt that countries where there is a good fraction of expenditure with respect to the gross national product in research and innovation, and countries who are able to make the system more efficient, also in terms of administrative support, as Eva was mentioning. I think she should intervene on this after me. Countries who are doing that are more successful. One can envisage, for example, the use of infrastructural funds, I would believe, not only for, also for research, and I see this trend going. But I would leave the, I would suggest that Eva comments on this as well.
Thanks very much. Eva, what do you say to people who say the ERC is under pressure to spend more money in Central and Eastern Europe, but surely the national funding agencies there need to do more? It's a sort of two-way process. Just take on that point.
Yeah, I think that first of all, ERC should not change, and the criterion for excellence should definitely stay there, and where the PI comes from, and the host institution, and these other points should not be taken into account. The excellence is the only thing that should matter for the ERC. But I agree with Fabio that science, the level of science in general should be somehow increased in these countries. It's not clear exactly how this should be done. Some part can come from the EU through these infrastructural funds, but this is also, I can see this in my country, it's a very slow process, and it's very hard to work with these infrastructural funds. For example, my institute has I think it has one of these big grants, but it's going on for more than 8 years and it's still not signed, so the money is still not there. It's just a very, very slow process. On the other hand, I think the countries themselves should invest more in science and somehow maybe reorganize the science, take a few places which are the best in the country and then really invest in them. To just invest in the best science that they have, and then if the whole level of science in the country is increased, then also there will be better candidates for ERC grants. And another point is mobility. These countries should also increase the mobility of their scientists, because somehow in these countries that are performing less well, the mobility is very low. So the scientists are used to the old-fashioned way. You enter a lab as a PhD student and you stay in the same lab, in the same building until you are retired. So this should definitely be changed completely, and scientists, when they are young, they should go abroad to different countries to learn new things, to get new ideas, and this will also help to help the scientists themselves to develop as a scientist and to develop new bold ideas that are great for excellent research and for ERC.
Thank you, Eva. Those were excellent points. Does anyone else want to pick up on that? I've received some other good questions, but if anyone else wants to come in on that particular point, you're welcome.
May I add just one thing, Clive?
Yes.
Just, one other point that should be mentioned, in my opinion, is the fact that besides the science it financed and the grants it gave, the ERC had a tremendous structural impact on the organization of science in many countries, and I can witness in my country, in the sense that research systems that perhaps were that were stagnating a bit with respect to the fastest running European research systems, pushed by the ERC example, were able to adjust and introduce more dynamism, more openness to young people, to establish themselves earlier in their career and so on. So that's, I think, one aspect of the ERC that shouldn't be under-evaluated.
Thank you very much. This is a good question, which I'm going to ask Anna to answer first. As the European Council cut billions of euros from the European Commission proposal on the research budget, it is clear that the research community failed to get our message across. How can we do better in the future? I know this is something you mentioned in your initial remarks, Anna. What can the scientific community do better to improve the way its message is getting across to the public and media and through them to the politicians? I think everyone should answer this because it's an important point. But Anna, you start, please.
Yes, thank you. No, it is a really important point, and I think it holds for the entire university sector, both in relation to teaching and research. We need to be better at communicating what we do and what value we bring to society, economy, the environment, health, and all these different areas that the diversity of science addresses. I mean, one of the ways of doing that is simply talking to different audiences, and there are many, many different routes through which we can do that now, both online and through mainstream media channels. It's not that every scientist has to be a science communicator, but there needs to be some element within the training of scientists about this process of communication to different audiences, and providing, again, the infrastructure to support scientists to do that in a better way. But it's not just the responsibility of an individual scientist. There are lots of organizations that are doing great work already in terms of communicating not only the substance of science, so disseminating our findings, but also communicating the scientific process. And I think the current pandemic that we're currently working our way through has shown how important it is that we have a scientifically literate citizenry within Europe, and understanding how we make judgments about risk, probability, and those kinds of questions. It's increasingly evident that we need to be better at doing that. And I would flag a number of organizations which are doing incredible work for science policy communication, science society communication, whether that's organizations like SAPEA, which is part of the European Commission's science policy advice mechanisms. Organizations like the International Science Council are really trying to bring together social and natural sciences and communicate science as a public good. This is not going to happen by magic. We do need to invest also in this for scientists, to give them these kinds of skills, transferable skills and communication skills, and recognize that when scientists are doing these processes of communication, they're not in the lab doing the experiments. So then you need to take that into account in terms of the demands which are being placed on scientific shoulders.
That I couldn't agree more with, as someone who's obviously trying to communicate it. Jean-Pierre, can the ERC leadership do more from the top to encourage grantees to communicate? Or do you think that's something more for their host institutions, their universities, even their national governments?
Actually, the ERC already started some very creative ways. I was very pleased that during my term, and of course it was not me who did it, but it was just, we opened the door for this. The ERC created what is called ERC Comics, which are web comics, which bring together artists and scientists. And the stories they have been building have been fantastic. Really very creative and very original. But for me, what was even more important was the fact that this was not just one thing, but that the artists, several of the artists and scientists continued to work together after they had produced the web comics. So this was one example of an initiative which was quite original. At the beginning, some people said, well, that's crazy. It's not going to work. It was just the opposite. It worked beautifully. The next point I want to say is that also before I finish my term, the ERC, at the initiative of the communication unit of the agency, created the special awards for the public engagement. And actually, Anna is one of our laureates for this. But what was very interesting is that that was the first time this was tried, and the number of applications received was something like 170 applications. And so the people had to show what they had been doing in various areas of engagement with the public in different forms. So it shows that at the level of ERC and at the level of the agency supporting the ERC, this is taken very seriously and very professionally also. And I think Fabio was the member of the Scientific Council who was in this jury, so he can report very directly on this. But if you allow me just one more word on the very peculiar situation we are after the pandemic. You know, for many heads of governments or heads of state, the present situation is totally unheard of. And it means that just to keep the society going, the amount of money which had to be mobilized and really without any precedent, just to keep things going in some way, is so huge that actually nobody really knows where we're going. And so in a sense, one can understand that without having a visibility for 6 months, a year, talking about a framework program for 7 years is really an unbelievable challenge. So I think the key point is to obtain, in the sense that people, for a minute, think that when they are talking about the next framework program for the European Union, they are talking about something which is going to regulate the funding for 7 years. And when at the moment, the visibility is just a few months and not even a year. So you see this unbelievable challenge of mitigating between the immediate decision, which will have an immediate impact, and the long-term vision, which is absolutely indispensable. In the Chinese say, you know, there's this expression, taking the long view, which I think is extremely important these days. But of course, it's extremely difficult to obtain that politicians take a long view in these very difficult times.
Yes, very good point. So Helga, are scientists, I'm sure you'll say they're not doing enough, but could they be doing more to help politicians take the long view that Jean-Pierre has so rightly pointed out that we need? I mean, this is all related to public communication of science.
Yes, I would say what has happened over the past decade or so in terms of scientists communicating to the general public has tremendously improved. And we have also discovered that it's not enough to point only to the shiny products, if I can call it that way, but also to make the public aware of the process of how you reach a result, how you reach, just as Eva said before, unless you get the right kind of agent that works in the therapeutic process, you will not be able to communicate to the public why it is important to invest in the kind of work she does. The other question, which is much more difficult in my view, is how to reach the policymakers. And the hardcore of the policymakers, in my experience, are the ministers of finance. Because we can all have access to our ministers of research. They sometimes feel part of the community even, but in the end, it's the ministers of finance who pull the string of the purse. And I think to reach the policymakers, there is one message which is very important, and this brings us back also to what Jean-Pierre said before. You know, we live in this very unprecedented period of a pandemic that has brought us a lockdown, that has brought us into a situation where the economic long-term consequences and the social economic consequences, we don't even have a clear understanding of where we are going and the kind of collateral damage that we will see in the next couple of months. At the same time, in my view, it is this virus that pushes all of us, all societies, to go further the road towards digitalization to datafication. It has become very clear, talking to people who are modeling simulation models, disease models, to try to predict, be it the ICU beds in hospitals that will be needed, or what is going to happen immediately. You need very good data. And one of the lessons from this pandemic was that we are nowhere. We are sort of in the bubble of the big hype, big data will solve all our problems. Let me assure you, there is no big data fix, neither now nor in the future. And this is where citizens and the public comes in. We have to raise awareness. What are data? Where do they come from? In which context have they been collected? What is the bias possibly that they carry, etc., etc. Things that, good scientists have been aware all the time, because we work with data all the time, and we know how to be, organize skepticism. This is what science is and what it does. And this is something we have to get across to the general public, especially to policymakers. It's not only about upskilling part of the workforce. This will be necessary. I call it upskilling and not reskilling, because it really means to bring people to a higher level of understanding and not just to shift from doing one thing to another thing now with the technology that is delivered and has been sold to us by the large corporations. But upskilling people is necessary, but it's not enough. We have to raise awareness. We are really entering a new phase in the development where we go as society, and where science and technology is, accompanying us or leading the way. And therefore, this means instilling critical thinking in the schools already. We complain about the youngsters being taken in by fake news. We complain about conspiracy theories, etc. You have to start in the schools with instilling the kind of questions that young people, almost naturally, and because they are curious, want to ask, and give them the answers that come from science. And this is something we have to get across to policymakers. It's a package and a bet on the future. And if we miss it, we will be in big trouble.
Thank you. That was said with real passion, as it needed to be, Helga. Eva, as a biologist, how can you help in the process that Jean-Pierre and Helga and Anna have been talking about?
Well, I'm trying, from a personal experience, I'm trying on the level of Croatia. We are trying to talk to the policymakers. And as Helga said, we have a very good relationship with the Ministry of Science. They understand our problems, and they are willing to increase the funding and help scientists in different ways. But then when it comes to the Ministry of Finance, this is where the problem is. I have to say that through this talking about ERC and excellent science and so on, the Ministry of Science managed to make one small thing, but it really helps, and this is to give all ERC grantees in Croatia, after the project finishes, 2 positions. They can choose between 2 PhD students or 2 postdocs, or 1 PhD student and 1 postdoc. So this is at least some help for the continuation of these projects, and some recognition of the importance of the excellent science. and we are working on making also possibility for permanent positions for staff scientists in the labs that had ERC. And we are also trying to do a lot in communication with the public. So my institute has an excellent PR office, and every time we have a certain paper published which has an important discovery, or when somebody gets a big grant, we have a press conference, and all the journalists from major TV stations and major newspapers come to our institute, and we try to explain to them what this really means, what are we doing, and why is this important for the society. And I have to say that this is working very well, that the journalists are really trying to understand the science point of view, and they're doing a great job on telling this to the public. So all these main discoveries or work that is happening in Croatia ends up on the main news, on the main TV channels and in main newspapers. So I think that the public is getting better and better view of what the scientists are doing, and that science is important, and that science is also fun, and that scientists are not some strange people somewhere there, but that this is also to inspire young people to come into science, to show them that science is fun and important. And this has been going on in recent years. It was not like this maybe 10 years ago, but in the recent 5 or 10 years, it's increasing, and I think this is really helping the public to understand what scientists are doing, and to engage young people to enter science.
Yes, I would agree with what you say, and also what Helga said. I think as a science journalist, scientists have got much better over the last 10 years or 20 years than they were communicating with the public, but there's clearly a long way still to go. And I've had messages here saying, I agree with Helga about the need to get through to finance ministers, which is not the easiest thing to do. I'll take another question from my tablet, slightly changing the subject. There are examples of national funding of ERC evaluated top projects which just did not make it in the ERC. Could the ERC do more to recommend other national research agencies to fund proposals which you can't? Let's go back to Jean-Pierre for that, and then Fabio.
Well, this has been one of my jobs, actually, as president of ERC, to talk to ministers, to try and convince them that there was worth having at national level some funding available for what we tended to call the unfunded A's. That is, the people who got an A, the best possible grade in the evaluation of the ERC, but that in the end, as I mentioned, we are not able to fund. And actually, a number of countries have put in place, either through public funds or sometimes from some private funds coming from non-for-profit foundations, to support these unfunded A's. And I know that actually in the context of the negotiation for the budget with the Recovery Fund, that maybe some money from the Recovery Fund, which is not earmarked for Horizon Europe, could actually be asked by countries to really fund research, and maybe among the part funding research, maybe use some of that money to do exactly this. And of course, this is the only way we can do. So the ERC cannot recommend to fund this project or that project. We just can, if asked, that let the people make the evaluation they receive from ERC available. We cannot make the evaluation available if people have not been funded, but the people receive the evaluation, and they can make the evaluation available to their government or the funding agency or the foundation, and then if a program is in place, then they could be supported. So this is a mechanism which has already been explored. I think it went up to almost 10 countries who were doing that. Now it regressed in recent years. Of course, with the pandemic, I don't know exactly where we are. But this effort to really get the funding of ERC shouldered by national funding is definitely something I worked quite hard at, and with some success. But of course, this is the kind of things which had to be done and redone and redone.
Yes. Fabio, what's your perspective on getting national funding agencies to pick up more excellent work that doesn't make it with the ERC?
I'm aware of many countries in which this takes place. Just to mention the closest example to me in my country, well, for a period there was the ministry financing unfunded aid, so those projects that were classified at the top level by the ERC, but couldn't be funded for lack of budget. Then, well, the problem was interrupted for a certain point, but turned into another program, which is also valuable to provide top-up money for ERC grantees to establish themselves in the country. But this ways of funding unfunded aid has been taken up by, as Jean-Pierre was saying, by local institutions. For example, universities, many universities, including mine, have programs that after a very light screening, give grants that are not as sizable as the ERC grants to unfunded aids. Just to come back to a point that was touched before, you need knowledge and science to solve problems, also the problems of society, but you need excellent science, you need good science. So in all this, also to give advice to politicians, the peer review system of science is fundamental. And I think that one of the successes of the ERC has been to establish a rigorous international peer review system. As council members, we are spending a lot of our time to scout for excellent reviewers, to identify the best of them, and to convince them to participate in our selection panels.
Thank you, Fabio. Another question is, what is going to happen about opening the ERC up to the world to collaborate with researchers and funding agencies outside the EU? I don't know how much this issue is tied up with the budget or how much it's a separate issue. Obviously, as someone from the UK, I'm very concerned that there should be some continued UK participation in the ERC. But looking more broadly than that, again, I think I'll start with Helga and then go to Jean-Pierre. What do you see is the scope for making your excellence worldwide?
Well, from the very beginning, it was clear that the ERC is open to researchers, the best researchers from anywhere in the world, provided, and since it is European money, the stipulation was that the PI that has an ERC grant has to spend 50% of his or her time at a European host institution. Now, this is a reasonable proposal because you can also split the time. You can come for 2.5 years, or you can arrange your visits to the European lab or your research group in any way you want. The problem in practice turned out that you need already to have contacts with such a host institution. I spent some time at the very beginning to make the ERC known. Now the ERC is known and admired all over the world. But in my time, we had to go out. I remember I spoke in India, I spoke in New Zealand, in Japan and in other places, just to tell about the ERC. And afterwards, the interest was always very great. But then it came back to this sticking point. How can we get in touch with a university, with a research lab that is willing to host us? And then we came up with the idea, in order to facilitate researchers from outside of Europe to get to know and to make themselves known to European research groups, is to have agreements, and we started with the National Science Foundation as the sort of sister organization, to have whom they select, and we, ERC, was willing to match them with labs. So several of these people coming from the US into European labs and see, what is happening, so they become part of the ERC team. This has to be matched, of course, in terms of research interest, that's obvious. And then this scheme was extended to other countries. But it still remains a point which is difficult to solve, because you have already to have relationships. On the other hand, this is how science works. Your collaborators usually, and science is very collaborative in terms of international collaborations, but usually your collaborators are people whom you already know. You know why you want to collaborate with them. You know their work, you know it is complementary, etc. This is how science works, and this has to be kept this way. But we were also very clear, the ERC is not a mobility program in the sense that we now invite the entire world to come and work in Europe. On the other hand, I would say the kind of scientific reputation that the ERC has gained all over the world is very encouraging, because researchers now everywhere know about the ERC. They admire what the ERC does. If you look at the National Science Foundation right now, people are complaining that there is a shift in funding away from the kind of exploratory work that I was talking about. So there's also a bit of envy even around the world in terms of what the ERC is able to do. But then to involve these people, you still have to have some kind of previous collaboration to make it work.
Okay, that's a good answer. Jean-Pierre, can you take that any further, looking to the future?
Yeah, I can take it first to give some figures. At the moment, the number of countries with which ERC has agreements that Helga initiated with the NSF is 12. And actually, there are some countries like Japan where we have not just one partner, but several partners, and even some more want to come. So for sure, at the moment, the visibility of ERC is big enough that actually a number of organizations in the world are really, are very keen on having a collaboration with ERC. And I must say that at the moment, the two countries which are taking the most advantage of this scheme are South Korea and Brazil, to the surprise that the NSF finally agreed that the way they defined the collaboration was too narrow, and they agreed to broaden it to more mid-career scientists, and we hope it's going to push that. To look into the future is indeed part of a new feature of Horizon Europe, which is called Article 12, which for the moment has not yet been agreed, so it's still a question mark in some sense, but it was the initiative of the Commission, and in particular of Commissioner Moedas, who at that time was in charge. That was corresponding to one of his, he had 3 O's, and one of the O's was open to the world. And he really wanted the program, Horizon Europe, to be open to the world. So the idea of this Article 12 is to make it possible for other countries to become associated, not just the ones who are geographically close to Europe. The obvious names, of course, are Switzerland. The case of Norway is a bit special because Norway is so close to the European Union, it's almost within. But of course, Switzerland, Israel, but there are many others. I mean, in the Balkans, the countries are there. There's also Tunisia is another country which is associated in the present scheme. But the idea was to open up the possibility for other countries to join, like Japan, like Singapore, like New Zealand, like Australia, like Canada, South Korea, and definitely some of these countries showed some interest. And so we are still in the process of knowing how this Article 12 will be formulated exactly. But one of the principles, which of course touch upon what you, Clive, mentioned, or the question you raised, is how is the funding? And the idea was quite simple. It was that if a country agrees to be associated, then it will have to pay the research which has been selected at European level, broadened to these associated countries, so that actually funding research in these newly associated countries will not actually have an impact on the amount of funding going to European teams in Europe proper. Of course, the elephant in the room, as you pointed to, is the UK. So with two questions, will the UK be interested in joining? And will the UK accept this scheme that I just described, that in the sense they accept, let's say, with the ERC, that some UK-based researchers apply to the ERC decides to fund them, decide to select them, and then the UK has to fund them. So altogether, you should know that the present amount of money going from the ERC to the UK is very, very substantial. It's about 400 million euro a year. So this money will not come from the European money, it will have to come directly from UK sources. And of course, it's a substantial amount of money, but that's what is contemplated at this moment. As I said, there is no agreement on this. One provision which was put by the European Commission, and this is being discussed, is that if a country decides to be associated, it has to be associated to a whole pillar. So you know the pillar one, called Excellent Science, covers ERC, but also Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions and the large infrastructures. And pillar two is a more comprehensive one, and pillar three is centered on innovation, and probably association with pillar three will be more complicated because part of its funding has a slightly different nature. It's not just grants, but it could also be financial support, it could be loans, it could be really some other things, which of course for countries outside the European Union will be probably more difficult to accommodate.
Thank you. That's a clear answer. I've had some more questions. I don't think we'll have time to get through them all, but I will try because we've got to stop on time at 10 o'clock. One picks up something that's, of course, been mentioned already, and that is COVID-19. And it's a simple question. How will the pandemic emergency influence the future orientation of scientific research, if at all? I think, Anna, why don't you start to answer that?
I mean, I think that there's going to be impacts in the short, medium, and long term. I mean, immediately, as the process of science has been affected by physical proximity, about the ability to do research, to gather data, and the constraints around mobility, that's an immediate impact. Hopeful that in the medium to long term, if and when the policymakers, the policy shapers have an opportunity to take a more strategic view, that the experience of the pandemic and the underlying causes of that are built into scientific programs for investment. I mean, I think it's important to just reiterate what's been said in the previous kind of rounds, that science is the kind of preeminent transnational community. And I think, you know, as this keystone for innovation, the application of the scientific findings, a key component of economy, society, and environmental actions. And we kind of underinvest in science at our peril. And I think perhaps some of the foundations for the pandemic that we find ourselves in have been to do with an underinvestment in the exploratory science, this high risk, high gain science that the ERC really stands for.
Yes. Eva, what's your perspective? How is the pandemic going to affect research more broadly in your view?
Well, I agree with Anna, and I would like to add that, for example, for biology research, some of the funds now are being shifted directly to applied COVID research, and I think this is not so good in all cases because the COVID research, I think, should be done by people who are really experienced in the fields of virology, epidemiology, immunology, and all the relevant fields. And currently, many general biologists, molecular biologists are jumping in, and I don't think this is good because this is taking resources from the other important research that should also be done, and it's not done at the level that it should be done. So I think that this whole pandemic, from the research point of view, should teach us that really the exploratory research is important, and the solutions to the COVID problems, the biological problems, come from the research that has been done over decades, if not centuries, on viruses, immunological response in human bodies, epidemiological data, and what we have learned from all these fields. If these exploratory research hadn't existed for many decades, we wouldn't have been able to have any solutions to the COVID problems now. So again, the basic research is important, and this is, I think, what the policymakers and everyone should take as a take-home message from this whole thing.
Helga, in your opening remarks, you expressed concern about this. Can you expand on what you think, what damage this could do, this emphasis on rushing into COVID-19 in a slightly unthought out way?
Well, it follows on to what both Anna and Eva said. I think it's an unhealthy development if we just pour money into a field because we have an immediate problem, because we know the solutions have to be robust solution based on new knowledge that needs to be generated. So I fully agree with that. Turning towards the medium and long-term impact, I cannot predict it either, but I can tell you what I think they should be. And I think the COVID pandemic has brought home two things among others. First, that we are not as much in control as we thought we are. And this gives pause to reflect in many dimensions. But that in terms of research, we really have to come up with a new form of working in an interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary way. We are discovering on a daily basis what social scientists have been saying for decades, how closely related health is with socioeconomic factors. And it goes through every kind of disease. It goes through the life course. It affects the mortality, morbidity figures, the comorbidity, etc. All the statistics and data we have, you can see through the medical and the bio part, you see the social and economic factors. And this has to be brought in if we want to move on in the future. and also, I mean, somewhat closer home to Eva, you know, we also saw some completely unnecessary rivalry between, you know, what do virologists have to contribute and epidemiologists, etc. We need a broader understanding of what the different contributions from various disciplines have to be. And the social sciences have to be brought in, because there are the consequences that we will have to deal with, but even the phenomena. It is a socio-economic, biological, and medical problem that we are facing. And unless we come to grips with that, you know, we will not be able to really unfold in terms of when he spoke about exploration and exploitation, unfold the potential that research in this area in the future should have.
Thank you, Helga. We've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to ask each of you very, very briefly, in a minute or two, 1 minute, make a closing statement, sort of summing up your thoughts after this debate. Let's start with Jean-Pierre. Sorry, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
I can now.
Okay, very good. I just want to react to just what Helga said and then unfold to my conclusion. Really, one thing which was shown is that this pandemic came out of all of a sudden, and nobody planned it. And at the ERC, there were 160 projects which actually were relevant for the pandemic in its broad dimensions, which of course is very instructive. But the main quality which proved to be the way of doing things was to use flexibility. And the ERC showed a lot of flexibility and encouraged actually researchers, if they saw a possibility of changing slightly their perspective, they would be allowed to do that without further complication. My conclusion is very simple. I think Europe has been able to build with the ERC a system which proved its relevance and its efficiency. And I think there is not so often that Europe does that at such a level. It is copied in a number of countries in Europe, outside Europe. And therefore, I think it's a proof that Europe, if it is daring, can do fantastic things. And I think after you have realized this, then you should clearly continue to invest in such a success. This would be my conclusion.
Thank you. Fabio, a very brief conclusion, please.
Yes. I think that the COVID-19 crisis has shown us the usefulness of apparently useless knowledge and of interdisciplinarity and of curiosity-driven research. We saw that COVID-19 is being attacked by social scientists, mathematical physicists, data scientists, and all, of course, medical doctors, etc. So we don't know what the next big emergency will be. To be prepared, we have to invest broadly in frontier research.
Thank you. Anna?
Yeah, thank you. I think I would just like to reiterate that, and this has been clear from this panel, that science of all kinds, natural, social, humanities, can be frontier. I think if we are to address some of the many global challenges that we face, including climate change, but many others, biodiversity loss, social inequity, we really have to have this space for the kind of science that ERC permits and the freedom to choose the topics, the ideas, the hypotheses is significant. And this scientific freedom allows people who have creativity, imagination, to be able to address some of the most intractable, complex, wicked problems that we're facing today. And I would say that to continue the good fight of defending the free and responsible practice of science.
Hear, hear. Eva.
So very briefly, just pure or fundamental research is really important. The research that is driven by interesting questions, by curiosity, by new ideas, by bold ideas is really important and should be properly funded by ERC as it is now and by other agencies.
And Helga, you have the last 30 seconds.
Thank you. I started out with the question, do we still need excellence? And I think the answer is clear, at least from this panel, but also I hope from the wider audience. But excellence is never one-dimensional, and we have to keep this in mind. And let me just reiterate what I said before and what also Fabio and others took up, you know, the kind of new way of working together across the established academic disciplines. I think this is one of the most urgent things that needs to be done. And it needs the freedom and the usefulness of seemingly useless knowledge has been proven again and again in history. And it's a very forceful reminder that the ERC is much more than about receiving a big grant and having 5 years to do what you like to do. And the ERC is at the forefront of a societal development that starts now with this pandemic. We are pushed into digitalization and datafication. And there the ERC can be a leading agent in terms of showing how we can cope and develop this kind of long-term vision and strategic thinking that will be needed to be able to cope with the uncertainty of the future.
That is a beautiful last thought. Thank you, all of you. You've answered the questions beautifully. Thanks for listening. Thanks for the questions I've received from people online. Very, very good questions, excellent answers, and bon courage. Thanks.
Pass it to the UK.